Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics. Welcome back to the Love Notes. This is our second week. Hopefully you're keeping up. You've got your applique done, all of your hand embroidery, everything's trimmed and tucked away safely in your beautiful box, and we're ready to move on to section 2. And right away inside there we get to do some piecing, and I'm excited about doing that. So now we'll make our X's and our O's. Really fun here. Right away we are going to be doing the X's to start with and the O's, and it's really the same process, just different fabrics and rotated a different direction. So let's start with our Love You to Pieces A. Each piece, which is our pink, will actually have the two sides on it, basically the two corners. So in order to make one X, it'll take 4 of these, and we'll have 8 of these, and we'll just draw a line with a straight edge, corner to corner. Now we have a corner clipper, which is a great tool that you can use. And I might show you that on a separate. If you don't like to draw the line and sew on the line and do all of that, the corner clipper is a great tool, and that one's right here, to kind of consolidate the steps that are about to happen. And I'll bring that out just to remind myself to talk about that. But let's start off with the way that it's shown in the pattern. Let's start off with that. I always like to make sure that everything laid out exactly so. It is. And if you're feeling inclined to put a pin or two in there, go ahead and do that. I think I can probably put one pin in common and catch them both. You really want that to set right into that corner. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, and I highlighted on my pattern, is she mentions about sewing a scant seam on the drawn line. I'd never heard of that. I've heard of a scant seam allowance of a scant 1/4 inch, but I've never actually heard of a scant seam. She goes on to explain a scant seam is 2 threads width away from the drawn line toward the outer edge of the block. So if you're inclined to do that, absolutely go ahead. I did try that. I ended up going just outside the line, and my block, I wasn't as comfortable with that. So I'm comfortable sewing on the line, maybe on just on that drawn line. That is a certain diameter, right? So I'm kind of just biasing that line. I think that's enough to adjust for what she's referring to. So let's go do that. And I will be, from what you're looking at, it'll look like I'm on the line, and I really mostly am. I'm just on the very far right of that drawn line. And I've shortened my stitch length. I just want some more stitches in this fabric. Looks like I will need to move that pin real quick. Okay. Her next step is to trim block a 1/4 inch beyond the seam stitch. Now, one thing I'd like to actually encourage you to do, rather than trimming straight away, is check it. See if it's where you want it to be. So the quickest way is to just turn them out and say, you know, do my points look good? And I think they do look good, so I'm satisfied with that. Her next step, after you would trim that a 1/4 inch, is actually press the block with the seams toward the darker fabric. My normal instinct is to press out and away. We inadvertently did our first block like that because it's just habit, and it came out just fine. In fact, we have that block done. So if that's a natural instinct for you as well, to press all the way to the outside, go ahead and do that. The block will still come out. Or if you want to press toward the dark, as she indicates, go ahead and do that. So if that were the case, no matter which method you prefer, you're still going to cut your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if you're going to press toward, oh, I missed a thread there. If you're going to press toward the dark, just a little bit more challenging to do that. Not terribly difficult, but you'll just kind of press it back like that. Again, we did it that way, and then I actually did it a 3rd way, which I'm going to show you here. And I was able to get interlocking seams. Because as you can imagine, if everything is pressed the same way, and that's the next steps are repeat that. Repeat steps 1 through 7 to make a total of 4 blocks. If everything has all the seams pressing this direction, when these two join, that's a lot of bulk. So let me show you another method will actually be, and I've done that ahead of time. And we can use this one. We will use this one in conjunction with, let's check them. I might have kind of made that edge flare out just a touch. I'm going to trim that away. I think that double ironing I did created that little bit of that distortion. So what I've done, if you want to have interlocking seams, you'll still do your squares in the corner. You'll still draw the line. The only difference is 2 of them will be pressed to the outside and 2 will be pressed to the inside. So let's look at that. 2 are pressed this way and 2 are pressed this way. When I create that, let's just turn that over and make our picture here. And let's make sure we've got them in the right position. Do you see how now I have some of my bulk is going to the middle and some of my bulk is going there, and I have an interlocking seam, which is desirable. I've done one of those ahead of time. Let me see if I can find the one. That one's right here, where you can see I have interlocking seams, and it helps the block lie really flat. Let's go ahead and actually sew this together so you see what I'm referring to. Now the center is of course one of our most important places. So while I always lay the pieces out. You always want to do that and make sure you've got the correct site picture before you sew everything together. So right sides together, and I'm going to start here, which means I need to flip this over. See that interlocking seam right there? I'm going to nest that seam just like that, and I want to pin that because that's the point that I want to come out just so. Let's look at this one. See that interlocking seam? You can see that with the overhead camera. I'm really focused on this, that place. And let's go ahead and we will pin that one as well. Don't let me forget about this corner clipper I wanted to tell you about, which basically alleviates the need to be drawing that line. More about that in just a little bit. But let's go ahead and sew these together. It's very important you have an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance here. Let's see how we did. The great news is if you don't like what you see, there's extra fabric in your kit to be able to do it again. You don't have to live with that. And if you're uncomfortable with a block, try it always with scrap fabric first if you're worried about running short of fabric in your kit. Now, my first thing is to check this point. That's what we are going for. We don't want that to be off, and I'm happy with what I'm seeing. So let's go ahead now and we'll press that seam open to evenly distribute our bulk. Now I've been using on previous videos, my iron was on a medium because I was doing some applique, of course on full hot. Now anytime you're doing piecing, you want to be on the hottest setting that your iron will give you. So let's look at our spot. I'm happy with that spot as well. So let's go ahead and open that seam. There was a time in my quilting where I just really didn't regard pressing and interlocking seams. I didn't really give it the importance that I felt that I now know it's important for me to get the accuracy that I'm looking for. So never be afraid to modify a pattern's pressing directions to maybe give you a better result if that's something that you prefer. All right, with right sides together, now you can imagine that center point and those points right there are most important. So I'm not going to just start pinning on the left and pin left to right randomly. That's not going to work. We'll start pinning in our very middle, and I just check that. Now we'll get a pin, and we're going to pin right down that seam. So we don't want any of that to budge. And make sure the head of that pin is away from that 1/4 inch seam track. Of course, we want our nice interlocking seams, which we get again right there. So go ahead and come in with a pin in the diagonal. And again over here. Let's just get that one all nice and smooth. Okay, let's sew that together. Okay, let's have a look here. Let's see how we did. Let's see if our points came out as we hoped. And I'm happy with that. I think that's going to work. And that's the fun part about piecing, is it's a challenge for accuracy, pinning, pressing, accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. Those things are the ingredients that it takes. And if you're anything like me, I find that my error is actually to sew more than a 1/4 inch seam allowance. My blocks almost consistently are a little bit short of the size they're supposed to be. So if that is what you also find to be true, you might want to think about switching over to a scant 1/4, which is a little more elusive. Like, where is that scant? It's hard to find. But we're supposed to be having about a 4.5 inch block, and it looks like we actually achieved that today. So I'm feeling very fortunate about that. And we go ahead and repeat that process to make more blocks. So we'll have a total of 3. And then the block assembly, let me just move forward real quick, is it should be exactly the same. Exactly the same to complete the O's. And so, you know, my instinct, I can see this. I want to sew those together, but I see that she does not tell us that. So for now, as much as I want to sew those together, I think I better put those aside, and we will move on to our jar of hearts. Now, I know I will be using some of my applique, my glitter things, so I'm going to go grab those out of my kit. I'll get those out on the table. We'll be using, it looks like, our glitter papers in white, red, and pink. And we'll also need our vinyl and our background fabric. So grab your bag that is for Jar of Hearts, which I have here. And I'm going to get my pieces out of my embellishing kit, and I will be right back with those, and we will get moving on our jar of hearts. Okay, so I'm back with all of my glitter things and my vinyl, and I realized I didn't tell you about the corner clipper. So let me just quickly show that to you as an option. I really love this tool, and I always want to introduce you to things that I believe in that might be great additions and you may not be aware of them. So as you saw before, I drew the line from corner to corner. The corner clipper actually replaces not only that step, but another step of trimming the quadrant seam allowance after you sew. Here's what I'm saying. The corner clipper works for any time you have this type of situation where you're adding a fabric to the corner versus, thus the corner clipper. That solid line you simply place on the diagonal. You'll place this fabric right side together, the corner piece, with your background fabric, and you'll just place this corner to corner. And you have a lot of wonderful alignment lines. You have guidance this way and guidance this way and on the diagonal, which I really like that. I like lining up in several places. Now you'll just trim that. Keep in mind you've got bias going on. As I mentioned before, if there was ever a reason to add sizing, this is an even greater reason because bias has stretch. Now let's go to the sewing machine, and we already have our built-in. That point is where we're going to start sewing. Let me scoot that a little bit closer. So as I mentioned before, one of the other benefits of using the corner clipper is I don't have to go back now and trim off that 1/4 inch because it's already gone. Now I simply take this to the pressing mat and either press to the outside or press to the inside as I prefer. So I just wanted to show you, it's an amazing tool. I love the accuracy of the corner clipper. I love the convenience. I don't have to draw the lines. I don't have to trim the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So, okay, I've said it and I've showed it to you. Let's move on to our jar of hearts here. This is really fun. We finally get to use glitter. Now the cool thing about Kimberbell's glitter is it's actually fusible, so you don't need to worry about adding fusible webbing to the back of the glitter. All right, step 1 with jar of hearts is with a disappearing pen, we're going to trace the design onto background fabric. Before we even go down that road, what I did in advance, because I can see these applique shapes here, is let's jump forward just a touch. We're going to go to the trace the heart shapes onto paper, which I've done here. And this is just a freezer paper. It's a nice thick freezer paper. And I just went to the back of my shapes, and she lets you know here, hearts 1 and 2, and that's what's being referenced on this page here. Hearts 1 and 2 are out of our white glitter. So I'm going to grab 1 and 2, and that's where I love to just go ahead. You can use a friction pen because we're going to trace around the shape and cut out exactly on the line. And you'll just basically trace around and cut out on the line, and you'll repeat that for all of the glitters. I've done that ahead of time. I want to point out something to you. The glitter paper has this kind of vinyl, it's kind of a clear plastic, what does she call it? Clear plastic film that's on top of the glitter sheet. It's really kind of hard to remove. Karina was helping me during the video break, and it's a little bit difficult to remove. She found getting her kind of fingernail underneath that helped remove it. But just know you need to remove that film before you iron that to your background. So I know it's not immediately obvious that there's a film there that needs to come away, but there is. So once you have all of your hearts cut out and ready to go, the first step prior to that, mentioned with a disappearing pen to trace the design onto the background fabric. And then in the next step, trace the hearts and then fuse them to the background. what we found when we created, we did this ahead of time, is when we trace the design onto the background and then fuse the hearts down, all of our lines went away. So and then we had to redraw them. So what I'd like to suggest as an option for you, if you decide to trace it down ahead of time with a disappearing pen, be extremely careful of ironing down your hearts and try not to touch the lines, which is almost impossible. Here's another option. Let's go ahead and go with the option that I think might be an idea for you. And we'll go over to our shape here. And I right away recognize, well, I know I want my jar smack in the middle, and I know that I need my hearts to be in these certain locations. And if I feel confident that I can place them just so and move them directly over here and just press them on, I don't really need to draw anything at this stage. If you're a little uncomfortable with that and you feel like you're going to bump them, go ahead and just draw the outline of where that heart's going to be, and that's fine. So if we want to just draw that on real quick, that's 1, that's going to be 2, and kind of just a rough outline. I'm just throwing out ideas. You know, that's, especially within mystery, you know, I'm not getting a whole lot before you are, and we're just throwing out, hey, what might be some ideas? If you guys have suggestions that might help somebody else participating in the sew along, throw them out there. Those are all valid ideas, and we want to hear from you. So that's just one way to kind of sketch those out if you're a little more comfortable doing that. I feel confident that when I place this down and I understand which hearts go where, and you know, really, does it really matter? Probably not. But we'll just use that as our reference. We'll put our hearts down, and they can go anywhere you actually want them to go. So don't feel compelled to, you know, if you want all red hearts, do all red hearts. If you want a different combination or a different size, you can do that. And I think our white heart's bigger than this one. I'm okay with that. I'm also okay with just moving this, moving my vinyl. I've got a medium heat, and I am very carefully going to place this down, not disturbing anything, and then I'm going to iron those down to the background. I'll turn that off for now. Okay, they're in position. Let's go back to our instructions. Trace hearts onto paper, fuse the glitter hearts to the background fabric, and stitch around the heart shapes. So let's just pretend that we've done that. We're trying to save some time. It looks like we stitched down the pink and the red with white thread with just a straight stitch, which you saw me do last week with a straight stitch when we sewed the heart down to the front of the cameras, and just a straight stitch in red on the white. But let's just pretend, for time's sake, that that's already sewn down, and we can actually be moving with this one instead if we want. But I want to show you what that would look like if you choose not to do the drawn lines, because it's a little bit of a deviation from what's included here, but only because our disappearing lines disappeared when we ironed down those hearts. So I wanted to be able to show you this other option. Next step is to stitch the inner jar line. Now that is one line that you do need to draw on here so that you know where that's located. So we can turn our light box on. We know where our hearts are located. And this is the jar line that we need to stitch. That's the only line that I'll draw right now. And we'll go to my sewing machine. I need to switch threads because as you see here, she stitched this in this teal color thread. So I need to go ahead and switch that, and as soon as I come back, we'll start sewing that line. So I've drawn my line. Let's go right back into our pattern. And what our next step is, after we've sewn our inner jar line with a tight straight stitch, is to place the vinyl over the hearts and pin in place. So when I just see this, the heart that's out here doesn't need to be covered with the vinyl. So she gave us plenty of vinyl, so just place that and pin well away from where that will be sewn on. And I'm going to be using my flower head pins. They lay just a little bit flatter for me. We don't want any kind of tuck in that, so let's smooth that out. Our next step is to trace the jar design on paper, and you saw that I did that ahead of time, just to save us a little bit more time together on camera. Using a light box, align the jar over the appliqued hearts and pin the paper in place, and then we'll stitch directly on the trace line. So using the light box, we'll align the jar over the appliqued hearts and pin in place. So let's go ahead and get to that design. And I can see, boy, a light box is essential in this project, isn't it? We've used it a lot already. So I'm definitely aligning that here, my stitch line. And I'm now looking at my stitch line and really just making sure that I'm where I want to be. I'm going to move that away, and I'll just pin that in place. And now we'll just stitch directly on the line, similar to the way I just stitched the inside of the jar with a shortened stitch length. It's going to take me a little bit. I'll show you what that looks, and then we're supposed to tear the paper away very carefully, she says. So if you're going to, you might want to consider a size 100 needle for this. Me just realizing this vinyl is a little bit on the thicker side. I have a super nonstick size 80 needle in here right now because I've been going through fusible. But now I could see that a size 100 needle, either the Schmetz 100 or the super nonstick, would be a great addition just to compensate for what's happening here. I think the logical place would probably be to start someplace like here. Knowing I don't really need to stitch over this line again because that's on the inside, but everything that else you see will be just a tight straight stitch. You'll just start and begin wherever you need to get all of the lines stitched. So let's go ahead. Her next step was to carefully, on the previous page still, gently tear away the paper. So you can imagine certain parts of this are going to come out more readily than others. Those more intricate shapes in kind of the upper jar portion, you know, maybe tweezers. I'm just throwing out some suggestions. If some of you watching have other ideas, would love to put them in the comments. We can learn from you. You know, it's just a time-consuming thing to get all of that out of there, but you want to be quite careful about it. So we'll just keep, and I'm so hesitant to kind of score it because I don't want to scratch my vinyl. I'm just kind of dig at it with my finger there to get in the middle portion. I just want to show you what it looks like. It's adorable. We are adorable. How cute is this? And I know there's a line down there that I can see. I'm going to actually warm up my iron. Now this is on the fly here. I'm going to warm up my iron, cover it with my pressing cloth, and get those lines away. I don't want to see those in there. I think my iron's still warm. Let's see if it's warm enough to iron that away. But we want to get those lines gone now that we've sewn. Good. Now they're, how cute is this? And now her next, ooh, hey, I think there may be something to warming that up when you get ready to trim, because now this is very pliable. This was really, when it was cold, kind of really stiff. Now that it's warm, it's very pliable. Her next step is to trim vinyl 1/8 of an inch from the stitch line, and that's where the Karen K. Buckley scissors come into play. And boy, that was really nice when I warmed that up. This became very supple in my hands. So maybe warm it up as you go. So we'll just be getting in there, being so careful to, this is something very time consuming that I'm actually going to do off camera, because it's just time consuming. I need to be able to trim that around there, but look how cute that is. And I also need to get that jar portion out and trim the whole thing up. But that's our jar block. So let's move on. Fun stuff with that. Now I can check the box. I've used glitter, sheets of glitter and vinyl. Our next step actually with that block is to trim that to 6.5 inches square. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to trim up this one. Although this is another one that's actually stitched down and it's going to go into our quilt. This is the step where I'm actually not going to trim this up now that I'm thinking of it. I want to get the vinyl on that one. Remember, this one wasn't stitched all the way down. This one is, and this is the one that'll be going into our quilt. So I'll be repeating that process between week 2 and 3, putting the vinyl down again, and this is the one going into the quilt. And once that's done, we'll go ahead and take our 6.5 inch square up ruler, and you saw me square up a block in week 1, same process. Go ahead and square that up to 6.5 inches. And it says the dimensional felt hearts will be added after the quilting is complete. So while we can see those hearts in there, they'll be added a little bit later on. All right, let's move along. Sweet Talk is next, and this is kind of fun. We're back to our hand embroidery. Now you get to choose. Do you want the designs, 2 different designs? Choose one. Sending hugs and kisses and Valentine wishes, or always better together. We went ahead and actually opted for always better together, and we've done that ahead of time. I just wanted to show that to you, what that looked like. But the stitch that I want to show you today is the satin stitch. This one has the back stitch like we did in last week, and this week we're going to be doing a satin stitch, and this is a really cool stitch. So let's go ahead and go over that real quick. I've got my fabric in my bag, and I drew out the design just to save us a little bit of time. And so it's the same instructions, it doesn't matter whether if you're doing sending hugs and kisses, Valentine wishes, that's all back stitch and French knots. But if you're going to be doing the always better together, there's some satin stitch, which I will show you right now. That'll be with 3 strands. That's the better together one, that's the one right here. So of course we've drawn our line on, we've got 3 strands of certain colors, 6 strands of others. The one I'll be focusing on is the satin stitch. So that's in our petal right here. And one of the ways that I have found works really well for a satin stitch is to outline the shape that I'm going to fill in first. And that's what's happened here. We just filled it in. When I first started doing satin stitch many years ago, I just started doing these straight lines, here to here, all the way. Well, my line became very blurred, and I now realize that one of the keys to a successful satin stitch is actually outlining the shape first with a back stitch, and then coming back and filling in with that satin stitch, which is just long straight stitches. And when they're placed closely together, the sheen has a little bit of a satiny look. Thus is the name of satin stitch. So just go ahead and outline that first. So now that we have our petal of our flower outlined, it's best, and Kim mentions it as well, she gives a lot of really good tips and techniques. In pattern 1, you can refer back to that. Notice, by the way, as you begin down section 2, that page starts with 14. It's a continuation, really. So while we are done with section 1, it's a great reference because there's tips on appliqué, tips on working with specialty substrates like glitter and leather and vinyl, as well as things like satin stitch. But one of the simplest ways is to just kind of start right actually down smack through the middle, and know that that edge and that are your boundaries. You must stay within there. And while it is a longer stitch, it's okay. Now, I have always thought, well, it's a long way to travel on the back side of the project, but we've tried it actually 2 different ways. And you can see there's a little bit more of a pulling when you try to not come back across the back. When we come back across the back, notice how smooth this petal is. There's not that tuck, that pucker. What that means is, while you may be tempted to, while you're back here, is to come right along next to it and try to go back up that way. My experience is when you come across the back like these, it gives a smoother finish on the front and you don't get this pucker right here. So I wanted to show you that as well. Again, you might want to consider adding a fusible stabilizer to the back, or fusible interfacing, I should say. It just gives it a little more girth, and it's less likely to pucker like that, and it'll also hide any beginnings and endings like we've talked about before. So I traveled all the way across the back to come back to my starting point, and I'm going to fill in here. We don't want to see any backing fabric once the stitch is complete. So it takes a little while to fill in a satin stitch. And right now you're like, you know what, that embroidery machine's looking pretty good. Yes, for me too. Maybe in the future. But for now we'll do our hand stitching. And this is a great thing to save for maybe a road trip. And you can just do a little bit of hand work, make the time pass by when you're traveling to and from wherever you're going. And you just continue on all the way from edge to edge, just like that. It's really straightforward. The temptation is to take, to try to go too wide, and then you start seeing the background. So you do want to put one stitch right next to the other. And the other error that can sometimes happen is if you pull one of these too tight or leave it too loose, you don't have an evenness on the surface. So you want to work on your tension being the same. And we'll complete this side here. We're getting very close. Maybe just one little extra one right in that corner, right in here. It's subtle, you probably can't see it, but I can see just a touch of the background. Okay, now you can just scoot your needle under here, just like that, and just come up on this side of center and just start working your way toward that side. And just like before, you're just going to tie off as normal. You're going to go back underneath your stitches and just come up underneath and tie off 2 times. I always like 2 times just in case. Then you just cut your thread. Once you're done with the block, as she shows here, you'll go ahead and use your rectangle square up orange pop ruler to square this to 4.5 by 6.5. But please note, I want to show you, point this out, stems will be sewn into the seam. So it's okay to have that portion kind of deep in your alignment, and she points that out here because you kind of want that to be tucked in like it's growing out of the bottom. Okay, done with Sweet Talk. Moving on with Seal with a Kiss. These are some backgrounds with some applique shapes, so let's go grab those things. Let me grab those out real quick and I'll get that all set up for that next part of our quilt. I have everything ready to go with the Seal with a Kiss, and we're going to make 5 blocks. So we have Seal with a Kiss 1, 2 and 5, 3 and 4. Basically, they're all made the same. We've done those ahead of time. I wanted you to see what those look like. We've squared up 4 of them. I wanted to show you the one that wasn't. So we have our background fabric, and of course we have our applique pieces that are our scallop frame. I'm so glad that's laser cut. I can't imagine tracing that out by hand. No, thank you. And cutting that out by hand would be quite a chore. So basically, it's layered like this, and we have the heart, and we of course have our number 5 here. I like to be able to use diagramming to be able to trace things on, like my number 5. I know if I go ahead and iron this all together and put this on the background and then think about the 5, I'll have to trace it by hand and freehand it because I won't be able to see. So I'd like to encourage you to follow these steps and use a micron pen, because if we use a friction pen, if we use a disappearing pen, it will truly disappear when we iron everything down. So we don't want that to happen. So let's go ahead, you'll grab all of your gray shapes and you can just lay that gray square on, and just know what you draw is what you're going to get. Now here's the great news. Let's say you make a misstep, or a misdrawing I should say. There's plenty of fabric in your excess fabric for you to just go ahead and cut another shape. But we know you don't want to have to do that, so just be careful. We drew our 5, and if we felt like we needed a layout diagram, we could do that, but we know it's pretty intuitive. Basically, we're just going to line that up so you have the same amount of white around, and again, if we want to just try to center that, we can. The other thing you could do if you choose would be to draw that frame. But I think we've got a large space to work with. Put it in the spot you like, that's even. And I'm not going to do the leather yet. Let's just get this down, position where we like it. And this square, I believe it's just 2.5 inches. It's 2.5 inches, right? We've got all kinds of room to square up. So don't worry about really drawing that frame right now. Just find the spot you like. Let's go ahead and iron that down. And I went ahead and grabbed a piece of heat and bond light off camera and just put that on the back of a piece of the red leather. And that's when we will be using our cloth. I'll iron that down. And that's when you would go ahead and you'd stitch everything down with a straight stitch in the red on the heart. They have a cute little blanket stitch here I can see, and they've back stitched the 5 and the cent symbol in just a back stitch in black thread. So really straightforward on that, and we've done that ahead of time. So you could just see what that's like. We just mimicked what they did. And I went ahead and drew that frame in. Now, you can also see, I want to point this out, I drew the frame in ahead of time, and I did it in a permanent marker because I knew when I ironed this, the lines would disappear. I wanted to point out something, true confessions, I'm lopsided. My alignment isn't quite right. There's a lot of reasons to not draw the line ahead of time in a permanent marker, but simply wait. And you can go and do it now if you prefer, by putting this, once it's already stitched down, on top of here and drawing the line. Or if you're comfortable, just grab a 2.5 inch ruler, lay that on there. You know where that's, I still recommend drawing that with a friction pen, not a permanent marker, because now I've marked this. I have a certain amount of latitude I can move around because I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance when I sew it all together. But you see the point. I right now really wish that I could iron those away, and I can't. So this mixing and matching of permanent markings and disappearing lines is very important, and to know when to use what and when. So I will go ahead. I'm going to use this as my guide. I'll line that up. Now that all of my ironing is done and I'm not going to be erasing those lines, yes, let's go ahead and find a friction pen. Let's use that instead. So that way, if there's any lines we don't like, we just simply iron those away. So we'll just draw that, that, and that. And then we'll just move our ruler up to draw the bottom line. So this little 2.5 by, this is a 2.5 by 6 ruler actually. It's very handy in this project. I've been finding that consistently handy because she does a lot of 2.5 inch. So now that's nicely lined. If I didn't like that, like, ooh, my ruler slipped, that's no problem. I get to iron that away and I get to start again. You get the idea. So once that's all done, now you simply square your block up and those will be going into your box waiting for the final assembly. So there's one more step in our journey here on our section 2, and it's a little bit of a curveball. When I was looking for I'm like, where is this fabric? Where is that? It actually ended up being, she talks about bunches of love. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Bunches of love, if you refer back to your first pattern set, is actually in section 4. So she truly is trying to, you know, make it more of a mystery of where blocks will actually be happening. We're not always going to be working in the same row, and I did not realize that until there was a piece left over in the first week, and now there's this that's coming out of row 4. So it's the same thing. Bunches of Love was in row 4, so here we are. Same thing like we did over here, where you're just going to be drawing your embroidery lines, and you'll be doing a satin stitch. Let me just show you that one. The only thing that I wanted to show you that's a little bit different about that one is you notice how there's a line drawn there. That is your guidance of, okay, once you draw that on and you do the satin stitch, it stitches from here to the edge. I can just draw that with my here to here, just like this, and here to here, that direction. So it truly gives you that texture, and I think you can see that there. And that block, once it's done, she also mentions to go ahead and square that up with the pop rulers to 4.5 by 6.5. And again, she's got the stems where they're coming right into the seam allowance. So it's like growing out of the block itself. So we have completed, it's been a long journey all the way through our section 2. I have homework to do to study up for section 3. You have work to do to finish all your hand embroidery and of course all of your applique. So I'll see you next Monday for section 3 of the Love Notes Mystery Quilt.